In 2026 and 2027, creative is going to be the most important thing that you can optimize on your meta ads in order to scale. This mini course is going to be everything that I know, having scaled multiple brands to 7, even 8 figures, and have briefed ads holding more than 6 figures in ad spend. These are things that I'm seeing from actively managing more than 4 million per month in ad spend and overseeing a lot of brands. And I'm very confident that this is everything that you need to get started and write high converting ads and learn everything that you need to know about meta and creative strategy. Now, before going into the video, if you want to dive deeper into some of my trainings, click the link below. You're going to have a few options to work with me, but also digest some of my trainings completely for free. Again, we're going to go through a lot of stuff today, but without further ado, let's actually get straight into it. One of the most important things to understand first is how the actual ad works, how Meta actually optimizes our ads, because it's going to be the first thing that before diving into creating actual content and creatives, because this is exactly how we want to think about strategizing and how we need to think about our ad strategy. Now, this is basically how Meta algorithm works post the Andromeda update, and this is a few key things we're going to mention. First of all, what happened before the Andromeda update, it was basically, and I mean, to an extent, obviously that wasn't exactly what was happening, but essentially we had, let's say, one audience that we were picking. So for example, maybe a large interest tag, or maybe even the broad demographic target that we had on an ad set level. And we were saying Meta, okay, target this audience. Maybe let's say it is, fitness, just put it very simply. And then what we do is you're gonna have this, we're basically creating ads that basically just served specific purpose. Obviously they weren't I think very, very specific. They weren't very strategic to kind of say the list, because we have that capability in terms of like controlling a bit the audience part. Now what has shifted now with Andromeda is something very, very important. So let's say that now we again, this is again post Andromeda, just to make sure we are obviously aligned. Post Andromeda, what happens is very simple. Let's say that you have ad 1 here, which is, let's say that it is a UGC or user generated content. Let's say you have ad 2 that is also a UGC, but maybe having a slightly different hook. So let's say this is hook 2, this is hook 1. So you have another ad here, ad 3, which is going to be again UGC, but has hook 3. And then what happens here essentially, obviously we are from an audience perspective, we know that we are pretty limited into a broad enough audience, right? Now what happens now, Meta, if these ads are under the same message and the same angle, maybe they have small tweaks in the hook, maybe have small tweak in the body, but the overlying look the same and targeting the same exact people. So let's say to put this into a very I guess tactical kind of insight here, let's say that this is around again creatine and more specific creatine for females, okay? And maybe all of this creative is creatine for females essentially. What happens here, Meta will group all of these ads into one ad ID or one entity ID as it's called, which is essentially a way for Meta to say that I will deliver these ads to one specific audience. So what happens here real quick, as we're realizing here, is like when we have a specific creative angle / creative concept, we are going to go through exactly how these concepts and all of this, I guess, how we define each one of those points in a bit. But the main thing to understand here is like Meta essentially, when it sees one specific kind of concept and angle, one specific message, it goes after that specific message, and that specific audience that will resonate with that message. And it doesn't care about how many ads we have under it, how basically we try to repackage it. It's going to be delivering the ads to the same exact audience. So that's super important to understand, because this will allow us to A, craft the right creative strategy, B, also have the right kind of structure inside our account to learn and scale as well. So the main thing to understand here, again, essentially, is again, we need to start getting more diversified concepts and speaking to the kind of different people to try to scale to different kind of audiences. Because one of the most common mistakes that I see brands when I audit brands is they have very high CPMR or high frequency, or essentially this all means, or even like some people call it first time impression ratio. Doesn't really matter how you call it and how complex you want to make this. Essentially it means that we are not reaching, why the fuck this is happening? We are not reaching new people. This is the underlying problem. Now, obviously, depending on the size of the brand, this is a bit different. Obviously, when we really trying to scale, we have a lot of kind of winning angle, winning stuff. Obviously, there's a different complexity and strategy into it. But at the bottom line, this is the most important thing that we need to do with our creative strategy. We need to gradually, depend on the stage that we're in, start reaching out, start attempting to reach net new audiences, because that will basically allow us to scale and acquire net new customers and a new segment of the audience that we otherwise just didn't have access to. So this is the most important thing now. The second concept to understand, the second concept that is super important to understand is ad sequencing. Now, obviously, on any given setup, when you look at the account, you have campaign, then you have the ad set, and then you have the ad. Now, one thing to understand here is how Meta works basically, is usually you're gonna have, just to again put into, I guess, go back to the kind of basics here, campaigns, you want to obviously say your objective, sales, traffic, whatever that is. Ad set is where the targeting happens, which I think a lot of people really miss because they think that everything is like broad now, but the targeting really is here, nowhere else. And on the ad level, let's say you have ad 1, and then you got 1, 2, and we got 1 ad 3. Essentially what Meta does, that not a lot of people actually understand, is like it sequences the ads. So you will see, and that's also a very common mistake when you took a look at, and I really prompt you to go into the account and see any given ad set. You will see that one ad is going to get 70 to, I would say, even 90% of the spend. The second ad maybe gets like 20%, and the third one maybe gets like 10%. And obviously this ratio is whether you have 3 ads or like 20 ads as well. So what happens is like Meta sees that first ad here, the main ad that it will resonate to usually the broadest pool of people, because it sees what it will scale the most. Because usually what happens is we optimize for highest volume, so Meta will naturally pick up and start optimizing for the ad that will deliver the highest amount of volume, and the other 2 to 3 act as like the efficiency gainers that kind of balances out the inefficiencies that the first ad is causing. And and again, how exactly that happens, obviously Meta, everything like how basically attributes Meta attributes each sale within the ad platform that we see on a last click basis. So even if someone just saw that first, it was pretty much sold from the first ad, but actually saw the third ad or the kind of second ad and actually purchased through that, the purchase will gonna go to ad 3 and ad 2 here. So what that basically means is we need to group our tests and our creative strategy in a way that take this into account and also not be reactive on an ad level, because it's a mistake that I've done personally as well, and then I'm seeing day-to-day brands doing, is like they see these two are having a 5x and 4x and a 5x ROAS, so let's kill this one and just maintain these two. What happens when you do that, those will start taking spend. Obviously they're not as strong as the main one, because this one did most of the lifting despite having lower efficiency. And you end up in a position that essentially you pause your kind of top performer. So it's very important to understand as we go through the ad level, we will get much less reliable data to look at. So obviously when we want to optimize from a ROAS perspective, it's just very, very hard to do so essentially. So with that being said, let's actually dive into exactly. So with that being said, the first thing to take a look at here is obviously we need to take a look at like how actually can we structure our tests and our creative strategy and what really matters here. Because like to me, that means that we need to have a concept diversity, so we can start getting a lot of new people and our basically brand into new audiences. Number two, we need to have format variety. Again, make sure we have different formats for the same reason. Again, focusing on the hook and having an effective hook, but also making sure that we are having the right kind of volume as well. Now, let's actually dive into the first pillar here in terms of what's making a very great creative strategy, which is going to be the concept. Now, concept. Fucking hell. The concept is one of the most important things you have to understand. And by me, what I mean, and by concept, how we define a concept here is going to be the persona and a specific angle and a specific offer. Now, a persona is basically, again, who you're actually targeting. Maybe you got potentially, obviously, busy professionals. You maybe have, again, on a more kind of broad level, you may have like male, female, but usually it's a specific persona. Is maybe like, women who want to lose weight and, over 40 or something. This specific persona. Now, we are going to go into personas and how we like to think about it, but the first is our angle is essentially exactly that, which is like how we communicate, how we have picked is a specific way that we have picked that we are going to be trying to talk to this persona, or essentially how we're going to basically make our argument to this persona. So it's the position that we're going to be taking into approaching, again, that specific persona. So for example, it might be, and again, we are going to cover angle specifically in a second, but it might be, for example, a bold statement. Okay. So for example, here it may be that if you're eating carbs after 8 p.m., you are doing X thing to your body. Now, again, completely off my head. I'm not a fitness specialist, but that's essentially what it is here. And from a broad perspective, the more that we try to lead with pain, the better. Or lead with the problem, again, essentially, the same thing, the better. We want to agitate the problem, we need to agitate the pain so we can make our ad relatable to the people that we want. And it brings, again, people who already have the problem, are aware of like a specific problem that they have, are aware of a problem that they have, a specific problem that they have, that they also potentially want to have a solution, but maybe they don't even know the solution. Again, don't worry about it. We're gonna go. So this is super important in terms of the angle, and the offer is obviously, usually this is obviously the least flexible thing to kind of change, because obviously if you have, especially if you're a kind of early startup brand, you're probably gonna have maybe one SKU and maybe like one offer. Maybe that's, again, a bundle, maybe it is a gift with purchase. It's very hard to, again, change this essentially. Now, I want to dive deeper into the persona, because it's like one of the most important things here to understand when you're crafting a concept is understanding who we're speaking to and who is your customer. Obviously, how you can do this, you can go through research, and by research I mean obviously Google, but also Reddit, but also TikTok, and really dive into, and actually even a customer feedback or customer service, whatever you want to call it as well here. So obviously, I'm pretty sure if you own your brand or you are someone working on your brand, you know pretty much who your customer is. But it's very important to not be very sloppy and actually take the time and go into researching our customer reviews, researching our customer feedback, service if we have them. If we not, let's go into Reddit. Let's see how our other customer is actually behaving on the different communities, but also speaking about the problem and everything, so we can use this as fuel and ammo essentially to realize this, to use it on our ads essentially. But essentially, when we're talking persona, we need to think about who are our avatars essentially. Who avatars? Again, what problems are we solving? And what's the language we need to speak to them? Now, what I also want to dive deeper. Let's actually dive in now. As you can see, very important that you take most of your time now and go through these questions, go into, again, all of these research process. Obviously, you can use AI with it. I'll try to make a few different videos on how I like to utilize AI, but it's going to be the most important thing. You need to start spending I'd say initially, again, let's say that we're just getting this from like point zero essentially. You need to spend 70% of your time in persona and then 30% of time on angle. Now, when you're gonna be finding obviously a couple personas, then this needs to potentially switch, because obviously after up to a certain level of spend, you probably won't need to like bring a lot of new personas in and need to really double down on the angle. But let's go into the angle now, which is a very interesting thing, because obviously this is where we get a bit more tactical, I'd say, because like I mentioned, one can be around pain, in terms of like pain, like for example, does your dog always barks, people? Again, just bear with me in terms of that kind of thinking process here, but it's like a very specific problem. Like for example, it's like, do you feel your kind of, do you have bloating after eating even like one apple, whatever that is? So it is pain. We're trying to kind of resonate with people. Number two, for example, is like I mentioned, a bold statement, which essentially means like, usually this is like a statement that it will, a bold statement, or like something like contrarian, potentially even, you can have it here. So for example, if you use something, again, very, very simple, if you drink water with your food at lunch, you may be having this issue. Something that, again, is going to pique curiosity, because what we want to do, and we are going to go over this in a second on the hook itself, when we dive into hooks more specifically, is we want to do a couple things with our hook / angle. Is obviously we want to resonate with the people that we're going to be trying to sell, but also have something that is, that kind of piques curiosity and also is very clear for them. So having a very specific statement, you can also have here, like for example, did you know like 80% of fragrance are like water, something like that. So like something very interesting as well, and you can play around with it. Now, a few other things here is going to be authority. So, and this is working very well on a lot of supplement brands at the moment, where you kind of bring an authority figure. Maybe it is like someone from the lab, maybe wearing like a coat that basically explains and educates around the problem, and then obviously try to kind of position the product as a solution as well here. So very, very important thing here. Number 4, for example, it can be social proof. So for example, you can lead with like maybe the amount of customers, like 1 million customers bought this fragrance in 2026. Here's why. Again, very, very curiosity driven. Obviously that social proof really helps with that FOMO as well, in terms of like building that fear of missing out. So people are again more inclined to do so. Again, it's maybe trickier. Again, we need to make sure that we are being specific on how we position the product. We don't want to really go deep on the product itself, because we want to basically start building the awareness and then start building the product's awareness specifically as well. Now, obviously, us versus or comparison, again, very strong concepts. Again, and you could do a lot of stuff with them. You can also have a bit of a split screen, for example. Maybe like one is dishwasher capsules that are made by a main kind of manufacturer, like a huge kind of global brand, and maybe ones that, eco-friendly or whatever that is, and showcasing the performance and the differences. That's going to be, for example, an us versus them. For example, that would be an us versus them kind of concept. Again, a very great concept to directly compare with your competition and make you stand out in the market, and especially in a competitive market when you can really leverage something that your competition doesn't have. Is going to be super key into your creative kind of strategy here. Another thing is going to be demonstration. Now, this is mostly for like, again, cleaning products, things that we can apply. Think about cosmetics as well. There's a lot of like huge spenders, like with people just applying actively the makeup, or maybe showcasing that the makeup doesn't go away when, I don't know, maybe when you drink water, whatever that is, whatever the problem is. Again, it's great for some products. Some others, obviously, where you have like, for example, a supplement brand, is very hard to like demonstrate this exactly the kind of impact here. Number 7, a bit harder, but like before after is also great here. Like this is gonna be one of the most important, honestly, angles the thing here that's very tricky is obviously compliance. In the US, you probably may get away with it with a few stuff, but even there, it's going to be very hard. I know in UK, Australia, is even harder to kind of communicate this before and after. But for example, if you have a micro needling product, you can showcase like obviously what was the results before and after using the product. In terms of like visually showcasing that maybe they had more glowing skin or whatever that is. Obviously, on a weight loss scenario, is a very, very hard no. But if you try to get this out there in a more, I guess, clever way, it's also great as well. Now, okay, we got all of this, but like, what's the testing kind of prioritization here? Essentially, testing priority, like which one should we test first, and which one has like the most important kind of leverage here? Like again, it will depend slightly on where you are in your journey. I'd say angle is gonna be the main thing to look and start testing, because there's gonna be different ways that we can essentially package and make different arguments to our core demographic. Because usually you're gonna have, 2 or 3 key personas, and as you scale, you're gonna dive into micro personas as well that we're gonna go over in a second. But from a broad level, the angle is going to be the most important thing in terms of like how you communicate the message. You can do a lot of stuff. You can do a lot of stuff with it, and you can have a lot more variations to kind of walk through. Number 2 is obviously going to be the persona. To me, you're going to be the persona, and then obviously, like I mentioned, you can go a lot more granular into. You can go a lot more granular into create like micro personas. So, for example, on the previous example, let's say we have females over 40 that are trying to kind of lose weight. You maybe have actually females over 40 that in the kind of post-menopause, they have all these symptoms and they also want to lose weight, and maybe they're kind of struggling to kind of balance everything out. It's a very specific demographic. You see how specific we can be with our creative, the visuals, the messaging, the creators, everything. So again, to me, it's very important that we test priority. Now, arguably, it's gonna have the biggest impact out of everything, because obviously a much more compelling offer will do wonders, even if we not really at the top of our game from a creative perspective. Now, the thing with the offer is like there's only so many things that we can actually test. It's like, think about it, when we have a product, you may be gonna try bundles. You might try bundling. You might try gift with purchase. You might try, I don't know, a specific discount, a starter kit. There's a few things that we can do, and I don't think this is going to be the biggest level from a kind of creative perspective specifically. Although as you scale, this is going to be a very important thing to start testing in order to get to the next level of scale. Number 4 is going to be potentially format. Again, I think to me, it doesn't have a huge amount of impact, but when you're switching stuff from, for example, a video to static to a video, this can have a decent impact into bringing different people in. It's like, for example, I urge you to go to your partner's feed and compare this to your feed. It's going to be completely different. Some people really like real, some people like static, some people like, again, images, DPAs, whatever that is. So Meta will actually get over to them a lot more formats like that. So if you don't have that format in your account, you're just missing on a huge amount of audience here that obviously we don't really address. Now, I'm going to go next into one of the most important things, as we mentioned over, and you probably know already, it's going to be around the hook itself. The hook is one of the most important things. The hook is one of the most important things you need to kind of take a look at and really spend most of your time there when creating your ad, because essentially the hook is going to hold most of the, you're going to essentially make it or break it, because most people don't even get past the hook. So we don't even watch the ad, don't even go into the landing page. So we need to do a very, very strong effort to capture the attention that we need out there. So that's why it's like a much higher leverage thing to spend 80% of our time into hooks and like 20% of our time into body. Now, that doesn't mean this is a kind of rule here, but if you have specific amount of deliverables and things that you need to produce, like I much rather have 20 hooks with like 4 different bodies rather than like 15 bodies with like 5 different hooks. This is going to have a lot more impact in our spend and in an overall kind of chance to actually test and scale and actually learn something. Because again, most people don't even go through the body when they are watching an ad essentially. So super important thing here. So we need to start thinking about what actually makes a good hook here. And to me, there are again 3 things. Obviously, the one is going to be the actual visual, which again, how we basically demonstrate the so maybe that's a close-up shot to a garment or like specific clothing that then obviously zooms out. Maybe it can be someone, dropping something to the floor. Maybe someone is just making a very sudden move and just, gets everything out of his way on his desk, and maybe just, then introducing the product. So something that is very, again, intriguing, something that obviously will cause and capture the attention of our customer. But again, the most important thing here is, and again, maybe I'm just running a bit ahead, but the most important thing here is don't make your hooks clickbaity. Because the people, like what people actually do, and it's so interesting. They're trying to optimize for a thumb stop ratio, which again, we are going to go over iterations in a second on the next section here. And something that we definitely do, and we are going to take a look at creatives that have a poor hook and we try to kind of improve it. But the point is not optimizing for thumb stop ratio, it's actually optimizing for the conversion mechanism and the actual sales on the back end. And that will also come with and that will only come by having engaging and resonating hooks that actually capture the right kind of attention. So don't go completely over the top here. Just try to have a visual that will make sense for your brand and for your customer. Number 2 is obviously going to be audio here. A lot of people actually miss this, but you can actually, make a few sounds. Obviously, the ASMR kind of concept is a great concept of that, but you can make specific sounds or like audios. Maybe it's again, a very sudden drop, a very sudden sound, or maybe a very common sound that your audience actually knows about, and it will capture the right kind of attention. Number 3 here is going to be copy, which is essentially the text that we have usually on that first frame. Usually it's like an overlay text. Maybe it is, I don't know, maybe like a common reply box. But again, it is the actual words essentially on the opening frames. So let's say what makes a winning hook here. So what makes a winning hook here? To me, again, like I mentioned before, one is going to be relevance. How much this hook is actually resonating with our core customer, core persona. Number 2 is going to be curiosity. Do we create curiosity so people not even actually watch the first 30 seconds, but actually want to learn more about our product and really watch through the ad? And number 3 is going to be clarity, which essentially means to me, are we communicating everything quite clearly and we don't really over confuse and over trying to kind of overdo it essentially on the hook. And I think those are one of the most key things when creating a hook. But there's a few more. But if I would focus on 3 main ones, that would be it. Obviously, when you can add authority, that's great, or credibility. Maybe it's on a different one, but I'll just put it here. Essentially, trust here, essentially what we try to kind of build, which is going to be, again, through, like we mentioned, someone who is an expert or look like an expert. That was the leverage initially when people will start creating podcast style videos, because it was someone very authoritative. Obviously now everyone does it, so it doesn't really have any impact. But credibility, again, maybe you call out a specific article, a specific survey, a specific study, something that adds credibility to your overall kind of message. And number 5, potentially it can be specificity, which is again how specific we are with what we say. So for example, we're gonna say this is usually comes up as a numeral fact. So for example, you can say 80% of people in the United States are obese. Again, not an actual fact, but something that again it's really gonna pick the curiosity. Maybe you can put it here as well. But it's how we can get that specific, or maybe it's not just numeral just to be. It's not just numeric, just to be clear. It can be very specific in terms of how we approach the pain point. So for example, when we're talking about a specific persona, it can be let's say that our persona is a dad that struggles with like energy, and we are productivity kind of doing company, and you can say like specifically, do you find it difficult to spend time with your kids because of your energy after coming off work? Again, very, very specific kind of hook here, right? So all these to me, we're gonna make a winning hook, and this is very important to start thinking about your hooks through those lenses essentially. So I want now to touch a bit on the hook again, but through the lens of the whole creative and the body, because this is one of the most common mistakes that I see, where I think a lot of people actually, I'm not sure, maybe like, and this is one of them. I just want to start, I want to touch a bit on the hook to body kind of relationship, and what I see a lot of people like really do a big mistake here, which is they introduce a product very, very directly and like very, very abruptly essentially into the kind of creative, which like miss the whole thing. And this is the concept of like bridge. So for example, you have your hook here, and obviously this lasts anywhere from like 0 to 5 seconds even. And then obviously to go into the body, you're gonna have a bridge here, and then obviously usually it's a CTA, let's say that, which is another bridge here. And this bridge is where people are actually are doing things wrong essentially, both here and here, because like what they do is like they go into like a scenario that, for example, they say, do you struggle with like cramps after, are you a woman that struggling with like cramps? Here is our product which actually solves us, which is like very, very direct. People haven't been educated. People are just not gonna buy through that, because it's very direct and just doesn't tell anything about the brand, the product, education around the problem as well. So what we need to do, and this is also on the CTA as well, because like what people also go to the other way of the spectrum. They tell the story here, and then they just out of nowhere just drop the kind of call to action with the product there. And again, we need to just be a bit more smooth with it, so we can basically get people from unaware to all the way to product aware essentially. Product aware, and this is going to happen through the ad. So basically, everyone goes through all of the stages of awareness. So then you go into problem aware. So from unaware to problem aware to solution aware to product aware, and then obviously fully aware. I'm just putting here product aware. So the most important thing here is just go through the whole. So how we're going to be able to do this is like, if you think about two axes here, the one is like your product, and then is the awareness of your product essentially. This is like, if you think about two axes here, you have time or length of your creative, and you have awareness of your product awareness, and you shouldn't go like this essentially. Like your ideal kind of, like the main thing that you don't need to do here is go like this essentially, and or like just this essentially. And what you need to do here is like, if we have time here, this is second, you need to go like very, very, very smoothly, something like that, because when you reach the point where we are basically now having the call to action here, we need to obviously have people be very aware of our product. But initially, we need to start agitating on the problem, picking curiosity, building all that curiosity, breaking resistance even, and really educating and telling a story here essentially. This is very, very important to take into account, because what I also see is a lot of drop of hook to call to action to click to purchase essentially. And this is a reason why it happens, because like people just haven't been primed and educated enough to actually properly buy your product essentially. And this is how you do it. You basically have a more smooth bridge between hook to body and body to call to action. Now let's go into the format here, because it's also a very important thing to like answer. Like, do you want to like, what's going to be the ideal ratio between statics and images and videos? Or like, how do I know which format to actually use, and how do I kind of differentiate essentially around it? And the key thing here to, I guess, the first things to ask about is obviously, the first thing to ask, I think it's going to be the highest leverage thing, is like, where am I over indexing, right? Because that's going to be a very easy opportunity for you to just capture a net new audience by actually being in a new format. So if most of the spend is on statics, easy, just take the angles, produce them into UGC or high production videos, and vice versa. And number 2 is going to be your age demographic that you're targeting, slash persona here, because obviously, assuming you have done your research, you're probably going to know where your ideal audience is actually, consuming content essentially. And for example here, older people are probably going to be better with a VSL, or probably going to be better with, statics, and obviously it's going to be with like maybe even high production videos as well, because obviously they kind of trust it a bit more, where like you can get people more into real / organic content as well. So things to take into account. Number 3 is going to be the stage of awareness, because this is also super important. Stage, no, what's happening? Because this is very important. Again, obviously, videos and statics can do a great job into capturing even unaware audiences, but obviously, like people who are gonna be, mostly focusing, people who already know your brand are gonna be much more inclined to just a quick static. It's gonna be easier to convert through just a very quick static, or maybe you have also a very easy, let's say a very small time to purchase kind of window. Static can actually be great. Maybe obviously you want to like really build on the top of funnel, which videos usually how it's going to be easier to do, because you have the ability and the capacity to just educate and just build curiosity. So this is another thing to kind of take a look at. And again, in terms of stage of awareness, again, that's how we got the whole funnel here essentially. I want you to think about most of your spends, and maybe not just spend, your resource to go into top of funnel. That means anywhere between solution to unaware. Usually it's going to be solution aware and problem aware, because like unaware is something that is very, very hard to actually nail, and most businesses watching this video are not in the 8-figure brand anyway bracket. And there's going to be middle funnel, which is probably going to be around like 20%. Here we have like 80%, maybe like 70%. So I have 5-10% here for bottom funnel. And this is very, very product aware and fully aware kind of messaging. So this is how you need to think about your format and your stage of like awareness as well. Again, this is going to be very, very dependent on your spend level, but it's going to give you a great proxy that will kind of help you out in terms of like start scaling here, to be honest. So up on the list is going to be, before diving into the actual account structure in terms of like how I think about testing structure and how we can take some of the concepts, concept architecture that we just went through into the accounts, I want to first touch a bit on diversity, because obviously this is something that it is a word that just comes up a lot now post Andromeda and recently. And what is going to be what's going to be the percentage that we want to focus on diversity around the actual like pure volume. And also because the first thing to understand here is like, so diversity is really, to me, is like, so diversity is very, very important, especially as you're trying to scale, because obviously you want again to capture those net new audiences. Now, like I mentioned, diversity is not just complete different asset, but also complete different messaging, like we explained before. So one form of diversity, like I mentioned, that you need to start playing around with, obviously messaging. So for example, maybe you're a brand that obviously sort of starts down, maybe like spending like 50K per month max. So you maybe have like 2 or 3 key messages. Now from there, you maybe want to start diversifying to like 4 to 6, for example. Start bringing different messages into it. Like another way that you're gonna do diversity, you're gonna go into that diversity kind of spectrum, but not by changing the messaging. It's gonna be obviously through the vehicle itself. So by vehicle, I mean how the creative actually looks. So this is where you can start playing around with like high production, VSLs, UGCs, statics. Like again, it is kind of the vehicle, how we're trying to communicate the message. So if you're over-indexing on any of these, you can start bringing into different kind of formats as well. So you can see you have essentially like hundreds, if not thousands of variations and iterations that you can do. Number 3, in terms of variation, is going to be also the emotional zones that I think not people actually talk about. This is emotional, not a lot of people actually talk about it, but you're going to get even a bit more subtle in terms of like how you can communicate these messages into being, for example, more so on that negative. I mean, negative, don't get me wrong, it's not like actual negative. It's more like having, really like basically how people feel after we communicate the ad. So if, for example, really push formal and that you need to act now and that you have a problem, that's more so of that negative kind of emotional zone. But it can also be, that, for example, more kind of positive. Maybe you have something more upbeat. Maybe it's like more celebratory. Maybe focusing on the kind of, celebration of it. Maybe just focusing on the solution of it. Again, it's how we also can communicate here. It's super important. Or we can also be a bit more, again, more like neutral /, like very soft, let's say. So it's more neutral, soft, so it doesn't really cause a lot of kind of issues here. So it's like, with different ways that we can, it's like different ways that we can speak essentially to the right kind of people. And this is how you can think about diversity, right? And like what's going to be the most important thing here is, because the next question that comes is like volume, because the next thing you need to look at is volume versus diversity, because diversity / I'd say quality for this one, because like to me, like there is basically a couple questions that I get. It's like, how much volume do I need to scale from a creative perspective, and like how much of that volume needs to be diversified, and how much it needs to be like iterations and that form. The thing post Andromeda is like we need to have strategic volume, which basically means that we want to have as much volume as possible, but having the right kind of strategy and the right kind of quality. So if we can, for example, if we can maximize volume, but have a very specific bar that we hold ourselves accountable to the quality, let's do that. But we don't want to sacrifice the quality, just build up a lot of volume. Now, volume will actually build the quality, but just really focusing, really just always producing, very low quality and very low quality ads. You're not gonna make it essentially. It's not gonna help us scale. So what we want is a nice kind of bit of volume here, but also make this to be strategically and really focused on, bringing those different messages in place, bringing the different vehicles in place so we can start scaling essentially. So again, we're gonna go into exact numbers in terms of the volume calculator on a separate video where I'm gonna try to kind of share my volume calculator. If you want to get a free volume calculator as well, click the link below and join my community where I basically go and share some of these resources completely for free. If you want a creative calculator in terms of how many ads you need to actually scale, click the link below. I'm gonna have my community where you can get access essentially and get the calculator for yourself. So with that being said, let's go into meta ads. Fucking hate. Let's go here. Let's go into testing. And this is exactly on meta specifically, to be clear. So obviously this is not a campaign structure video, but we're gonna go into like how we're gonna be structuring those tests, how I'm thinking about learnings and how optimizing based on the creative that we have essentially and the kind of data that we have. So the whole point with the structure inside the account is we want to extract specific insight or learning. And in order to do that, there's a few fundamental things that we need to take a look at. First of all, it's going to be, we need to test one variable at a time. Very important. So whatever that is, a hook variation, a concept, even let's say that it is a format even. We need to just make sure that we are structuring our test in a way that we obviously extract this learning, but also is a meaningful test. Because obviously we don't want to like test different body hooks, different bodies, for example, on one creative, because we know this is not gonna get us there essentially in terms of like the priorities for creative testing. Number 2 is essentially we need to group creative tests. Two is that we need to structure our account again in a way that enables exactly that. So what that means is essentially there is a creative testing campaign, most often than not, where essentially what we do is, and that's either on ABO or CBO. Now, before going into the actual structure, right, let's actually get this debate out of the way in terms of like which one should I use. And it's not like which one is better, it's like which one is better for your specific current situation that your brand is in as well. Because like, and it also comes down to a bit of a preference as well, to be honest. Now, with ABO, what you get is risk management, essentially. So you get control over the spend distribution, which essentially means risk management because we diversify the spend across different variables, different tests, and different creatives. Now, usually, this is not the most efficient because obviously we want, think about it, every new concept and test is going to be grouped into its own ad set and allocated its own unique budget. Now, from a learning perspective, this is amazing because we isolate each concept and each creative thing that we test essentially. But from an efficiency perspective, it's not that great, right? It's not the greatest. Now, CBO is way more risky to me and also, a bit better for efficiency. Because like what happens with CBO is like 80% of the spend is going to go to 20% of the ads plus ad sets. This is applicable for both, which essentially will mean two things. We're going to have, probably better efficiency because like most of the spend is behind top performing ads that Meta obviously thinks are performing. And at the same time, all of the other ad sets are going to have minimal to no spend essentially. Now, the only thing here is like, this is a very, very risky position to be in, to be honest. Because like what we do here is we group, is basically like a couple of ads or maybe like one, maybe two ad sets tops are holding all of the spend. So when things are fatiguing, essentially our performance is going to go out of the window because we don't have anything to kind of support that because all of the other ad sets just don't have any other kind of spend here. So it's a question of like risk management. I'd say if you're a startup brand, you're trying to kind of get an idea of what's working inside your account, maybe you're spending 1 to 30K per month, not 1, 10 to 30K per month, and you want to have an idea of what's working, it's going to be essentially 100% is going to be potentially CBO, because obviously then you got a bit more, you're a lot more efficient and focused, and you want to start getting into the highest levels. You want to start learning some stuff. You want to obviously being profitable as well. Super important. So CBO makes potentially the most sense. A more sophisticated level, ABO is a way to go, in my opinion. Now that we've got this out of the way, this is how we structure it now. And this is why it was very important that we had that training around concept, because what I like to do is group by concepts. Because what we said before is like Meta does the targeting on an ad set level, and it captures and it goes after a very specific audience. And that's what we try to do from a concept perspective. Because what happens on a lot of other accounts that I audit is like they group the tests and having quite a few different concept variety. So Meta doesn't even know what really perform. Meta doesn't even know who to actually target. And we don't even have the insight of like what's actually performing. Because as we discussed before, as we go down to the ad level, ROAS and performance is just not that clear to us. Because like you can have one ad that is performing well, but potentially from like one concept that is performing well, but potentially like some of the other ads maybe took all the spend that maybe had a kind of impact that is maybe like from like another concept. So this is super important to take into account here. So this is concept one, you got concept 2, and that's pretty much it in terms of like how structure it. Now, how many ads, you may ask? I like to go I like to go from 5 minimum to like 30. Obviously, there's no limit to it, but if you have the budget, obviously. But usually, this is where you're gonna get the best kind of results for your budget. So you have $100 to $200 to allocate per ad set depending on your AOV as well. So this is like the number that I would take a look at from an ad perspective. And the question is now, what happens now? How do you think about obviously all the new tests? Because we are going to go into like I'm reading through data and how we're going to be optimizing the creative process. But like, how do you think about essentially but the next thing is like, how do you think about but the next thing here is like, okay, how do we think about new tests and how we are grouping this inside the account? So for example, if you have new ads of like concept 1, do those get into the same concept ad set, or do we have a new one? Now, there's a few things that are going to lead us to that decision. If concept 1 ad set is performing well, I don't want to disrupt it, essentially. If that performs well, we're going to be increasing spend and scaling it. Now, because like when you introduce new ads, there's going to be an element of like obviously getting this back to learning, because obviously now it has to do the sequencing again of like the new ads. So I would add a concept 3, which is going to be maybe not, concept 1 V2 or like batch 2. Maybe that's more correct here. This is how we're going to add. Now, if performance is very bad, I don't mind adding into the same ad set as well. So we can try to see what performs essentially. And that's how I'm thinking about creative testing overall. Now, how do I scale this? Again, like I mentioned, I'll try to scale this 20 to 30%. Again, vertical scale. And on more sophisticated spends, let's say that we go above 30K per month, I want to have potentially a scaling campaign where I group all the winners. Now, sometimes it doesn't end in our favor. Some of the ads here that we're going to be promoting are not going to performing, but it's a great way to isolate the most spend around all the top performers, especially as you try to scale and you have a lot more performing ads. And this can act the same in scaling. So if you have a very sophisticated account and you have 6-7 figures in spend per month, you're going to start having the scaling campaign, having multiple ad sets where you promote all of the winners. Because then in the scaling, you're going to have the same issue where Meta basically won't, obviously all of those are winning ads, but again, Meta will not be 100% sure in terms of like the concepts and the that is actually targeting here. Now, optimization. What metrics should you look at in terms of like a hierarchy, in terms of like optimizing here? So number 1 is going to be spent. And the reason for that is Meta is always going to pick up the highest performer based on spend. This thinks this is going to be the most scalable assets, and usually it is, but also B, this is what really leads in terms of the sequencing as well. So that's probably going to have the biggest impact here. So we want to see what actually is resonating and what actually Meta is building the spend here. Number 2 is obviously going to be ROAS or CAC. Again, depending on what you're optimizing for. Make sure you actually test this. Make sure you actually view this on a 7-day click. So we are making sure we are tracking very closely to Shopify, essentially. Number 3, now this is where it's going to be trickier, right? Because to me, what I like to see is going to be volume. Because like, okay, we got the spend, we got the ROAS, but is it driving enough data and enough meaningful purchases to be very confident about the outcome here? Because if he has 2 purchases, I don't even know if that's working or not. Number 4 is where I dive into creative metrics. To me, obviously, thumb stop ratio is going to be the most important one, but also hold rate is going to be a very important one. And also go hand in hand is going to be CPC or outbound CPC, and it's going to be outbound CT as well. So very important. Actually, this is going to be potentially even first before thumb stop rate and hold rate, because this is going to give me an initial indication across my top performing benchmark. So I'm going to take my top ads and see how that concept compares to that, and see if this is a high performing concept from that. This gives me a clear indication. It's really never going to be my main thing I'll take a look at for deciding, but it's going to be a great way that I'm going to be optimizing. And then thumb stop hold rate is really points to the bottlenecks. Again, I'm going to definitely brief some iterations based on that, but nothing to really, but also taking into insight for the next parts and the next kind of creative stuff that we're going to be going through. Now, iteration. Now, we're going to the next step, which is going to be iteration. Now, another piece of optimization is not going to be just optimizing on the account, but also from a creative perspective. How do I think about optimizing here? Which is very, very important to do, which is essentially like what's going to give us, again, the biggest impact to the account and to the business, which is going to be always the first thing to take a look at here is going to be the, existing winners. Because obviously there's existing assets, existing angles, existing messaging that has been performing. If you have something that has spent 6 figures and spent, you better not just leave it like that. There's a leverage to be made by repackaging this. There's a few diversification tactics that we just talked about, potentially doing like going across different vehicles, across different formats, but also some simple hook testing can actually get us another 50 to 100K in spend here. Number 2 is going to be iterations we just described essentially. So can I do, essentially this is mostly hook testing. So if I can take some of those and go into and take like 50 new hooks, it's going to be a very, very low intensive thing from a resource perspective. It's probably going to give us a lot of things to play around as well. And it probably going to unlock, and it will probably unlock new spend as well. And number 3 is going to be net new, which is a lot more harder, but it's always going to be what we need to do essentially so we can start getting stuff here and here, because eventually whatever we do, 1 and 2 is they're going to be fatiguing essentially. So my opinion, 70% of the time spent and the resource is going to be on net new stuff. Maybe like 10% here and maybe like 20% on existing. Again, you can play around with these percentages a bit, but the main thing is the bulk of the kind of thought process is going to be on net new stuff. Now, creative team, super important. What do you need essentially to succeed? Now, this is going to be the ideal scenario. Obviously, if you're just a founder now, you have one brand that is a startup, you can pretty much try to do everything here. Or you can obviously outsource it with like freelancers and whatever that is. So the key part of this team, I think, is going to be obviously a creative strategist. Creative strategist is someone who writes the briefs and also the scripts with the help of AI as well. And it's really going to be important in terms of like leading that creative piece. Obviously, if you have a performance lead as well, or managing the account, you're also going to be contributing to that a lot. But SCS it's really a role that you need to have inside your business in order to start scaling your creative output. Now, number 2 here is going to be a video editor, and especially with like AI first. If he has experience with AI, it's great, because obviously you're going to have a lot more B-roll and a lot more stuff that is not obviously living anywhere, and you can produce a lot more creatives like that. So video editor is very, very important, because obviously you can churn out a lot of videos, which is usually what slows business down. And what goes hand in hand is a graphic designer to that, which is essentially someone who is mostly thinking about statics essentially, maybe some other pieces in your business like email, maybe like some UI, UX essentially, but I will potentially leave this dedicated to ads. But again, depending on the kind of stage that you are in. So this is a very basic team. This is how you should be thinking about it, and how I usually like, and what I've seen work is there is one weekly catch up where it goes the CS, the media buyer, or whatever you want to call it, growth strategist, head of growth, performance lead, whatever that is, when they think about the concepts and the performance as well, and do a bit of ideation, and then the CS goes into and briefs stuff with the production team. That's how you obviously work this out, essentially. It's super important to think. Now, one question that I get is like, where does AI fit into the whole creative process? Because from a creative perspective, you have briefing, you got ideation, essentially, you got briefing, you got scripting, and then you got production. You got production, and you got analysis. So AI is great, in my opinion, here and here. I I see so many people just go into Claude and ChatGPT and just try to kind of get like new creative from that. The issue with that is obviously you need to think about these models. What they've done is they aggregated a lot of data, a lot of basic conversations, a lot of like rough, very, I guess, knowledge out there. So it's not something net new. It's not something that is obviously also going to be applicable to your business most of the time, whatever context you give it. Whereas if you give it a lot of context, it can really help you out and a specific, skill on Claude. It can send out briefs way fast and scripts that, previously have been winners. So you don't need a lot to kind of worry about that, to be honest. Production is also going to be great, especially like on the video and the static piece. Again, there's a lot of tools, a lot of things that you can leverage. Not quite there, but there's a lot of things that you can leverage so you can increase your output. And on the analysis piece, again, it's very hard, what I've found, to correlate when you go into these models and the performance with the actual business performance. So I also think this needs to be mostly leveraged by performance/creative lead here. So there you have it. This is a video for today. So that was a mini course on creative strategy. Again, just to go back a bit, what we kind of learned is like how meta actually works, how it sequences the ad is super important to understand, and how Andromeda works. You need to start thinking on a concept level, and each concept that you are creating speaks to one specific demographic. Number two, one of the most important things here to understand is the concept, is the breakdown of what a concept is, which is basically one angle, one persona, and the offer. And we start speaking to one or two key personas, 1-2 key angles from when you kind of starting out, and then start diversifying and iterating based on that. As you scale, obviously what's going to be the most important thing is going to be the hook. Out of all of these, out of the creative is going to be the hook. Make sure you problem agitate, make sure you have clarity, you have resonance on your hook, and you also ping curiosity, while also thinking about the bridges essentially on your creative. Make sure you're introducing the product quite correctly and not just abruptly putting someone in front of your product. Now, before, you need to start thinking about the different formats and how you need to think about diversifying across your spend and your business, depending on what you have available, but also who you want to actually start targeting. Number 5 is you need to start taking a look at things like, you need to start thinking about the diversity principles and how you can start diversifying some of the content, and also bring the right kind of volume in to supplement scale. And number 5 is obviously taking all these learnings into the account, testing and learning into the right way, and then iterating and also producing new concepts based on that. And lastly, we talk about having the right kind of team to support in everything that we just obviously went through. Again, I hope this mini course really was helpful. I'm really confident that this can actually help you out a lot and be the first thing to take a look at. If you want to work with me one-on-one, or have your ads reviewed, or your creative strategy reviewed, click the link below. There's going to be some links that you can obviously have this ability to do so. But thanks for watching this. I appreciate it. And yeah, I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.